to the Warehouse Theater in the heart of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And here we have the best hour of music and conversation on television. This is Views and Vibes, and here's the host of Views and Vibes. Give it up for Mr. Tariq Bomani Walter.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to Views and Vibes. My name is Tariq Omari Walton, and you're in for a wonderful All right, everyone, welcome back to Views and Vibes. I am Tariq Walton. I'm here with Quinn Conyers, Bomani Armah, as well as my girl, Jam Donaldson. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about the different things that came from the Civil Rights Movement, that came from the hip-hop movement, and the way that they're viewed within American culture. We're looking at possibly electing the first African-American president to the United States Post. And we know that there's influences within the culture that have prepared people for this kind of challenge. Where does that come from? Where has that influence been stronger? Has it come from the Civil Rights Movement and its legacy, or the current hip-hop movement? Bomani, what was that?
I'm sorry. It's actually, since you mentioned it, it's interesting because Barack Obama, age-wise, is like the perfect tweener. Mm-hmm. He's a little bit older than the average hip-hop head, but he's very much the hip-hop generation. And he's at the tail end of the Civil Rights Movement, maybe like about 5 years after, I guess, when he was born. And it's interesting because I think that really plays out in his public image and his policy and stuff like that, because he's very passionate about civil issues, about social issues, about political issues, but he has a sense of raw honesty from the hip hop generation. He gets into trouble, quote unquote trouble, for making comments sometimes where he's trying to explain complex situations, including, when we talk about race in America, even the time when they asked him what his biggest weakness was, and I think Edward said he thinks about poor people too much, and Hillary Clinton said, she thinks about taxes too much, and he said, I lose stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's like some hip hop. That's some like hip hop raw honesty, right. And he's gonna have missteps because he's not gonna give you the kumbaya answer. Mm-hmm. He's gonna give you the hip hop. All right, this is what I think. You know what I'm saying? This is how I think we're gonna work through it. And so I think he is definitely showing a perfect convergence of those two sensibilities.
Right. Well, we have a segment of the show called Corner View, where I actually take a camera out to the streets and I asked everyone the same question. The question this time was, who has influenced American culture more to prepare us for a possible black candidate? And we'll see who it was.
Civil rights influenced people more.
Well, I would have to say hip-hop.
The honest thing is they both have had profound effects.
In reality, I think none of them have.
You're trying to link it to the civil rights movement or to something else, and it really has nothing to do with that.
Their minds are being influenced only by the media, not by anything else.
Because to get any of the movements, you had to have civil rights.
Youth of today they don't seem aware of the impact of the civil rights movement, as opposed to hip-hop. Hip-hop has affected the entire world. Like recently I was in Africa, and in Zimbabwe, 50 Cent is the biggest artist, in Zimbabwe.
The answer is, without hip-hop making people upset, making them angry and getting them to that point, you know what I'm saying, we're able to verbally communicate in our language, there would be no need for him to be here. You know what I'm saying? We can only accept the president when we accept our youth in turmoil and in honesty. Hip-hop gave us honesty, and hopefully it'll give us fuel for a new presidency. Is it the only way? Was it the only thing that had a major impact? No. We couldn't have done anything without our grandparents coming forward and hanging from trees and doing everything else in between.
But if you look at it on the surface, I think hip-hop has created more of an acceptance of black culture, good or bad, and in terms of that, it's broken down a few barriers, amongst the younger generations of America, and with that, I believe that there's more of acceptance.
Any response to what you heard from the people there? Quinn?
Definitely a response. I think there's a lot of negativity and misconception around the youth being involved actively in civil rights issues as well as hip hop. I think the media has a lot to play with that, because I am a part of the youth community right now, and I'm very much involved with civil rights issues and getting equality for all people, regardless of skin color and, you know, where people come from. And I think we give a lot of credit to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton for being, I guess, the first female to run for president and the first black male to be in candidacy. But what people don't know is people had paved the way for them. Hillary Clinton was not the first female to run for president. It was Shirley Chisholm in 1972, and she was a black woman. Secondly, Barack Obama was not the first black man to be in a candidate to run for presidency. It was Jesse Jackson in the early 1980s. So you have to understand your history as a young person to understand where you are going. So although I applaud Hillary Clinton, I applaud Barack Obama, I also applaud Jesse Jackson and Shirley Chisholm, because without them coming out of the civil rights movement, I can't stand here today and be like, one day I can potentially run for president. And I think that their involvement in the civil rights movement has had a huge impact now in the whole political process. And if you want to connect the two in regards to music, music and politics, music and the civil rights movement has always had a relationship from then till now. Some of you might be interested or even heard about the Yes We Can video that was done around one of Barack Obama's speeches. Now, it had different types of artists in it, but in order to connect to the youth community, you have to speak their language. And what is their language? A lot of us are interested in hip hop. So I think if you keep the marriage going on between the hip hop community, politics, and issues, then we can raise awareness, but also actually correct some of the problems that are wrong, and also kind of curb the misconceptions about the youth community being involved in social issues in regards to civil rights movement, because we're not just worried about hip hop. We love hip hop, but we also have a passion and a fire for what's going on right now in politics, social issues, and of course civil rights.
Now you brought up Shirley Chisholm, you brought up Jesse Jackson. Now when they ran for office, that was an extreme long shot for them. They weren't really taken seriously. Where this time, which it seems like for the first time in history, Barack Obama is actually being taken seriously. He is winning a number of delegates, he's winning state by state. And so when we look at what's happening, there's been a change since Jesse ran it back in, was it 88? You know, there's been a major change. You know, that's right, 84 also, right? Yeah, that's right. So there's been a major change, whereas here it is 20 years later, and people are actually voting for a black man this time. Now when we come back from our break, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we also will talk about how we can actually bring together this rift between the hip hop and civil rights movements.
I just got a quick question. I just wanted to know if you think that even the average person out there knows that there is this little rift between the hip hop era and the, the civil rights era.
I think so, because I think you can't go a week without hearing a back in my day statement. You know what I'm saying? The civil rights era talks about the hip hop generation like they aren't our parents. It talks about us like, violent, undisciplined, in the money and women. I'm like, okay, but y'all are our parents. Like, how did? And I'm not even in an accusatory way. I just like to take notes to figure out how to make sure that I can talk to my children in a way where they can take my values in a way that civil rights feels like we have. So, right, next question.
I was just wondering, what do you guys think are some of the key issues that young people are concerned about? Like you talked about them being socially aware and being socially active. And how is hip hop addressing those issues, or how can it address those issues?
The hip hop generation is worried about sex, drugs, and money. And the civil rights generation needs to find out how to incorporate their messages about sex, drugs, and money into hip hop. Every hip hop artist is talking about, I'm a hustler, I'm making money by selling crack. The civil rights generation, Bill Cosby, we need to support and pay for artists who like, I'm a hustler, I own my own business as a public speaker, I own my own business running a website, I own my own business as a teacher. So incorporate the messages the kids want to hear about, just put your message in it. The kids are obsessed about sex, and the civil rights generation doesn't want to talk about it. We got to compete with the message that they're getting from hip hop, and just talk about those issues from the angle that's more responsible, socially responsible.
But you know what? One of the big issues that the civil rights movement makes with the hip hop movement is that whereas the civil rights movement had a mission, they had a focus, the hip hop movement is very unintentional. It wasn't their intention initially to go out there and try and change the world. It's evolved into that. And so how do you make the hip hop movement more legitimate?
I think that makes it legitimate, though. The fact that it's all encompassing. You know what I'm saying? So maybe we have to pick an issue at a time to focus on. But I think the idea that since hip hop crosses fashion and music and education and stuff like that, I do think it's an advantage, but it's a quandary. People got to start really analyzing it more. Okay, next question.
Yes, my question is, what role do you see that the hip hop culture plays into the liberation of the modern day civil rights movement?
I think we have to understand that there are certain roles that people play in America. And of course, the civil rights movement and the hip hop community, there is a relationship there, but you also have to understand that sometimes the hip hop community is not responsible for politically pushing the nation forward. There's no one going to Jesse Jackson saying, you have to become a teacher, because his role is a reverend in the civil rights movement. So sometimes I think it's society faults hip hop artists for doing what they do, but that's what they are. They're hip hop artists. So let them have that role, let them be that, and then let the people who want to be civil rights activists do that and find a way to marry the two. So in regards to your question, I think that there's still a lot of misconception, and the biggest thing right now going on between the hip hop community and the civil rights era is the generational gap. We're not speaking the same language. And until we start speaking the same language, we're going to continue to have problems. There's going to continue to be a disconnect. So I'm not exactly sure what the magic solution to that is as far as connecting everyone, but I think we come up with an action plan, because 9 times out of 10, Jesse Jackson and a lot of other monumental civil rights leaders, they were at their prime during the 1950s, during the 1960s. Now, there needs to be a new voice. And one thing about Black America, we're always looking for a leader. We want somebody to lead us. Nobody wants to stand up and say, I'm going to lead. Dr. Martin Luther King was
Messiah complex, basically. We have a Messiah complex.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. So I think, again, back to my major point is it's a great disconnect between the two generations, and we need to figure out a plan to connect the two. One way that it is happening right now is having Smiley State of the Black Union, which I had the opportunity to go to in New Orleans this past February. And that's just one of the initiatives that they're trying to actually...
Well, what do you think one of the major problems is in terms of the way that the civil rights movement views the hip hop movement? I mean, it's like they put us in a box, thinking that, you know, we're still kids, we're too young to take over, not recognizing or reflecting on the fact that back in the 60s, they were kids too. And a lot of people who are actually taking credit for the strides of the civil rights movement made on our culture and for our people were actually kids who weren't really active in the culture back then. But they look at us and say, well, you know, you hip hoppers are, you know, too young, too inexperienced. We have people within our generation who are grandparents already. How can you say somebody who's a grandparent, who's a parent, you know, people who are out there starting their own businesses like many of us aren't experienced enough to continue the movement? Like you said earlier, we are just a outgrowth of the civil rights movement. How are we not ready to take over at this point? How do you answer that question?
I would say, though, I do not want to bash the civil rights generation, because I think a lot of their frustration with us really comes out of love. I think they can, and I think all of us at one point or another have looked at our communities and have looked at what the civil rights generation went through, and y'all kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's hard for them to look at all the opportunities we have, and sometimes they can get frustrated that they don't feel that we are utilizing all of their sacrifices and reaching the fullest of our potential. And I don't think there's a lot of people in the Black community that would agree with that. I would think that they look at what they could go through to go to school or just to vote. And so many of us, our dropout rates are high, no one's going to school, the parents don't care, people don't vote. So I think, not to bash that generation, I think they do look at us out of love and just want us to not to be obsessed with sex, money, and drugs 24/7. Because I think they just can't understand that. They had a purpose, they had a vision. And for them to see that, and mistakenly that's our vision. That's all we do. Every man for himself, get that money. I think that's very disappointing for them. So I don't, bash them with their kind of condemnation of a lot of the culture. But I do think there's a lot of room for the two to come together.
All right. Well, we're about to take another break. When we come back, we're going to have a wonderful live performance from a local artist. And hope you guys are ready. All right, welcome back to Views and Vibes. Coming to the stage now is this wonderful sister. She actually lives downstairs from me. Phenomenal performer. You may have seen her on Stage Black on TV One last season. She was the runner-up. She should have won. Once again, somebody very controversial on the stage. But please give it up for the Princess of Controversy.
Hey, how y'all doing? Y'all good? So we talking about hip hop, right? You gotta be careful what you say hip hop is. Real good music. Y'all give it up for Sense of Urgency. Yeah. All right, how many of y'all got peace in your life? Y'all got peace in your life? You got some serenity? All right, we live by a few principles. You gotta have growth, knowledge, love, and serenity in this life, right? So this song is called Serenity. So whenever I point to you, y'all say serenity, much like call and response, like church, or, you know, songs that you hear on the radio, all that stuff. Yeah. All right. I don't know in this life what my path will be. All I know in this life I want serenity. So if you just don't know, baby, don't you worry. Just seek growth and knowledge, love and serenity. Now what is life without a switch to replay it? You're going through a job, but you hate it. You're faking 'cause you're making some money, but now are you really happy, honey? Now what is life without a dream to strive for? What is life without a cause to die for? Playing it safe, no tech support. You gotta go against the grain, learn more and more. What is life without a smile and a tear? What is strength without a twinge of fear? What is truth without being sincere? Achievement comes when you persevere. I don't know in this life what my path will be. All I know in this life I want serenity. So if you just don't know, baby, don't you worry. Just seek growth and knowledge, love and serenity. Now there's so many people trying to find what's in front of us. We're so high. We're searching for peace, love, and happiness. Don't know that it's inside every day we're blessed. Blocking our own dreams, but don't understand it. Thinking that life should be as we demand it. The key is really simple. Just accept it like your pimples. Now it's so easy to choose to be negative. A woman think that it is hereditary. Let your soul sing, let your mind be free. Then say a prayer for serenity. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. Courage to change the things that I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. I don't know in this life Give it up for sense of urgency one more time.
I love this audience. I love you guys. That was great to me. Welcome back to Views and Vibes. Now, one of the things with Views and Vibes, we don't like to leave the show open-ended where we just have nothing but more questions. You know, we talked a lot tonight about what the problems are, where the rift is between the hip-hop and civil rights movement and generations. Let's start trying to figure out a way to heal that rift, how to bring that, you know, bring some closure to that rift. Quinn, how do you do that? How do we bring, you know, these two generations, these two very dominant generations of our community together?
First things first is we need dialogue with the action plan. I think we do a lot of talking, but people say do this, do that. Give me the steps. What do I need to do to accomplish, to like what you said, bridge that gap and heal this rift? We need to sit down, hip hop artists, people from the civil rights era, and regular people. Sit me down with Jesse Jackson. Sit me down with Reverend Al Sharpton, along with the other bunch of young people who are active in the political process. Also, bring Jay-Z, bring Lil Wayne, bring Barack Obama, bring people who are in the political process as well as the hip hop community with regular people. Sit down, have a conversation. How can we do this? How can we work together as a community? Because we're very, very much divided. All three different ones. We need to sit down, have a dialogue with an action plan to follow, and have someone measure us on how we are actually following this action plan. We need guidance with a purpose, with also someone to hold us accountable.
All right. Bomani, what do you think?
Everything she said, I agree with. But I think my concentration right now is not really on whether or not we can heal the rift between civil rights and hip hop. Is whether hip hop will make sure that rift doesn't exist with our children. That's my main focus right now. It's a continuing cycle. Every generation thinks the next generation is crazy. With blues, jazz, rock and roll, hip hop. I've seen clips of Ella Fitzgerald doing her impersonation of James Brown and being like, what the heck is this? You know what I'm saying? So I tell the kids all the time, one day they're gonna go into their kids' room and was like, what are you listening to? Back in my day, we had real songs like Laffy Taffy. What the heck is that? And so the idea is to have the dialogue now with our elders about how that rift created in the attempt to make sure that this is it might be a lofty goal, but I want this to be the last generation where it's that much of I have no idea what's going on with my kids. We gotta make sure that stops happening.
Okay. And Jam, what do you got?
Everything that they said, but I think, you know, for me and what I've seen and my experiences have really taught me how important just listening is. You know, we talk about having these dialogues and healing the rift, but so often when we deal with each other, we don't listen. We're so caught up in labels, hip hop, civil rights, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, black, white, and I just find that if the moment we actually sit down and stop having these kind of knee-jerk emotional reactions to everything, the quicker we can kind of get some real, honest, productive communication going and not just shutting people out because their approach is different or their political affiliation is different. I think, you know, as Black Americans are like the most geographically, economically, educationally diverse than we've ever been. It is so important not to just bridge the gap between civil rights and hip hop, but Northeast and Northwest. I mean, you know, we've become a very divided community, and I think listening is one of the first steps to heal that.
All right. And you know what? I want to tell you, that's the key for me also. It's about communication. Stop talking at each other. You know, if we're going to sit down at the table, we need to have open minds and open hearts and be willing to listen to what the other generations, what the other movements have to say. You know, that's the only way you can begin to even have a conversation, by listening. If no one's listening, if everybody goes to the table with their own agenda, there's no way that you can actually begin to move forward because you're constantly pulling back depending on whatever it is that you feel. You know, so that's the big thing. And also recognizing that time moves forward. And so you can't continue trying to do the same things that we did 50 years ago and expect it to work now. It's time to keep moving forward and plan ahead. Like Bomani said, how are we going to keep the rift from happening between us and our children? We need to think about where we go from where we are right now and where things may lead. You know, so anyway, I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. I want to thank my Paneling here, Jam Donaldson, Bomani Armah, and Quinn Conyers. And once again, my name is Tariq Walton, and this has been Views and Vibes, closing out the show. Another song from the Princess of Controversy.